Praise be Jesus Christ, and Merry Christmas, and welcome back to Season 7 of CarmelCast. CarmelCast is a production of the Institute of Carmelite Studies Publications. You can visit our website at www.icspublications.org, where right now we're offering a sale to commemorate the 150th birthday of St. Thérèse of Lisieux, whom this season is dedicated to, her spirituality and her writings specifically. And you can read her writings by purchasing those books, having them shipped to you, and we're offering 40% off all in-stock titles of St. Thérèse, her writings, and books about her as well. And that's running now, which is, I think today's the day after Christmas when this goes live, and all the way until the end of January. That sale will be available to you. Check out the description of this episode and down below and get more information about that, and visit our website. All the information is there as well. So, much like that one priest who always gives a homily on Christmas Day about suffering and the cross, we are talking today about a specific book in the corpus of St. Thérèse of Lisieux, called Her Last Conversations. And by the way, I'm joined by Father Michael Joseph of St. Therese, and I am Father Pier Giorgio of Christ the King. So this book, Her Last Conversations, St. Thérèse of Lisieux, Her Last Conversations, is a really fascinating book, but it sort of falls out of the general criteria of this season, in the sense that it's not an autograph writing of St. Therese, but rather it is a collection of reminiscences and quotes and conversations written down by primarily Therese's blood sisters who lived in the Carmel with her in Lisieux, but also there's a collection of broader other sisters who are not blood related to Therese, about the last 6 months in particular of Therese's life. These reminiscences begin in April of 1897, and they follow all the way until Therese's death on September 30th of the same year. So about 6 months. And it is really organized, the book is organized into, I guess you could say, notebooks. Really the first 85% of the pages of this book are the notebooks, the 3 notebooks of the 3 blood sisters of St. Therese. Yeah. So Mother Agnes, also known as Pauline, Marie, also known as Marie.
Maria of the Sacred Heart.
Marie of the Sacred Heart, and her sister, her oldest. Her older sister, but the next in age above Thérèse, so a few years older than Thérèse. Celine, also known as Sister Genevieve. Yes. And so these 3 sisters all lived in the Carmel of Lisieux with Thérèse. So 4 sisters altogether. And these notebooks, I think the majority of the text actually comes from Mother Agnes or Pauline. I think to kind of get our discussion going a little bit about the last conversations, or Her Last Conversations, this book is to talk about Therese's sisters and her relationship with her sisters. So I think it plays an important context into the spirituality that comes forth from these reminiscences written down by her sisters. And
just to say too, in terms of how you said it's included in the literary corpus still, or it's part of her collected works in a sense. And yes. In the original French edition too, it's part of the whole collected works that they have in this beautiful centenary edition. And
2 volumes.
2 volumes, that's right.
Because there's a second volume in the 1992 French critical edition that is all like editorial and manuscript critical annotations and notes that can't even be translated.
Yeah, like graphs and charts. And I know, it's amazing how much work and research they put into these last conversations, to take up such a substantial part of her collected works. And so it does say a lot, even though it's not Therese's writings, but how kind of trustworthy in a sense they are of it's Therese's words, it's her ideas, that were orally passed down, but still are on that kind of level with what she herself wrote.
Right. So, and Therese's sisters understood that. They understood that there was something special happening in the life of their their littlest sister Therese to want to write these things down.
Yes.
And so, beginning with Mother Agnes, I think of all of Therese's sisters, Mother Agnes or Pauline was very important to Therese because she was like a mother to Therese. So there's that important sort of motherly aspect, and I think because of that, we'll get into the actual notebook of Mother Agnes a little bit later. But just to speak about Mother Agnes's, I guess, how did Mother Agnes's understanding of Therese sort of change in the last couple months of Therese's life?
Yeah, because you can see there is a development in their relationship. Even because when Therese entered Carmel, of course, Mother Agnes was very much supportive of her, and she really fought so Therese could enter so young. But as it goes, in Carmel, there's no guarantee you're going to be with the person that you love all the time, and also there's a real effort on Therese's part to kind of not seek, in a sense, her like kind of natural inclination to be close to the sister who was her mother, like you said, that there was some distance between them at certain points, and even in the last conversation at a certain point, Therese says, it was like I didn't even know you anymore, so there were certain moments of distance, even though Therese always loved her. They always wrote back and forth. I mean, they always, of course, were close in a sense, but like all relationships, they have their peaks and valleys, and but when Mother Agnes was made prioress, and then we've talked about with the story of a soul, how she kind of, in a sense, put Therese under obedience to write the story of the soul, at least that first part of it, manuscript A.
And not with a lot of conviction either.
Yeah.
Put her under obedience, but herself didn't really think much. In fact, she forgot about it.
Exactly.
She forgot that she had asked her to do this.
Yes, and it's probably a common weakness in leaders, that you have all this, you use your authority and then you forget you even used it, and then the other person has to, kind of scramble to try to pick up the pieces. And Therese was so faithful, so she wrote that and gave it to her on her feast day. And like you said, when she got it, she didn't even read it for a while. And when she did finally read it after she had some time, she was so blown away, and she said, we have this little girl still in our midst, this saint with us. She started to see the greatness in Therese, I think, more, even though she always saw her greatness in a way. Mm-hmm. But this unveiled to her like what God had been doing in her, just how far Therese really had come.
Right.
And it was kind of a moment of wake up for Mother Agnes to say, we need to do the best we can to kind of appreciate this presence. Right. And so then when she got so sick very soon after that you can see why Mother Agnes was so anxious to write down all of these things.
And it was also in this time, the last 6 months of her life, that Therese wrote the last 2 chapters of Story of the Soul,
yes.
Manuscript we call manuscript C. And that was also, Pauline was no longer prioress, so she asked the then prioress, Mother Marie de Gonzague, if tell Therese to write down more, particularly about her life in Carmel, because she had read the manuscript A and was blown away, as you said, and so wanted to get more from her, particularly with respect to her Carmelite vocation.
Yeah, so you can already see Pauline had a sense that, and who knows if she thought I'm sure she thought this would be very edifying for other sisters, but maybe she even had a sense already that this is something bigger than us, maybe, and so we need to get this down.
And so this explains a little bit about what comes from the pen of Mother Agnes. We're going to use Mother Agnes and Pauline interchangeably. It's a bad habit that all of us have, because the what is called the Yellow Notebook, which makes up the bulk of this book, is Mother Agnes's reminiscences of her conversations with Therese, and so that sort of intuition that Pauline has to one, ask Therese to write manuscript C, and two, to begin writing down a lot about the last 6 months of Therese's life, in particular the conversations that they have together. And Mother Marie de Gonzague, the prioress at the time, was very permissive of all 3 of Therese's sisters to spend time with Therese, but especially towards the end. Yeah. But for Pauline especially, even 6 months prior, before really they really knew that Thérèse was at death's door. And so Pauline had this ability to be able to write down a lot.
Yeah, and it helped in a sense too that Thérèse was in the infirmary, so it was kind of like she was in a place already where she would need to be visited, and and at first, for the first couple months, so she could still go kind of in the courtyard and things like that, but eventually she had to be in the infirmary all the time. But I think it was providential in a way too, that she was in the infirmary, so you could visit her like a patient, and have that kind of time, because they would never have been able to have that time, in a different situation.
Right.
So,
of the three sisters of Thérèse, the next oldest, Marie, probably had the least amount of contact with Thérèse in these months. And that's sort of evidenced by the very short amount of material that she provides for the last conversations. How would you characterize Marie and Thérèse's relationship at the end of Thérèse's life?
Yeah, well, I think in similar way to Mother Agnes, it grew and developed as well, because, at the beginning, again, Marie is actually one of the sisters that had that had her own hesitations about Thérèse entering so young, and so they kind of had to overcome that in a way, and I think quickly they did. I think Marie saw very quickly with Thérèse as a Carmelite that no, she has a true vocation, and she's outshines in some ways us, in the living of the life at least, and so I think Marie overcame that, but still they grew together in a sense. But Thérèse always loved Marie, confided in her so much, because she was her godmother, and she formed her in many different ways, and she's the reason why manuscript B came about of the autobiography, and all of the beautiful doctrine we have about being love in the heart of the church is because Marie was asking Thérèse about that. And so towards the end of her life, then I think it just gives permission to just be as tender, as loving as possible, and whatever maybe tensions that there had been in the past, it's like those don't matter anymore. They just totally fall out of the horizon. But probably Marie had other duties too, so she wasn't able to spend as much time, right, as Pauline or Mother Agnes could, but she was definitely, the tenderness between them, you see, in the brief words that we have, and especially Thérèse's encouragement, to her, to keep following that path, to not get discouraged at her faults and weaknesses. And so you see this coming through in the words to Marie, right, a lot. So
yeah, I should mention here too, take the opportunity that if you're interested in more, we're only going to talk kind of really briefly about Thérèse's relationship with her sisters here in this episode. If you're interested in learning more about this, we did really an entire season on Thérèse's life, and going through her family life in particular. And I think that's season 3, so episodes like 22 and on, like kind of that section of CarmelCast. So definitely check those out. So finally, Celine. Now Celine is really interesting because she's older than Thérèse. However, when Thérèse enters Carmel, quite a few years before Celine, Celine is then sort of given the task of caring for their father, Saint Louis Martin. And so it's not until years later that Celine is able to enter Carmel. She wasn't really sure she was going to enter the Carmel of Lisieux. She had an opportunity to maybe go to French Canada. Oh, yeah. But she eventually makes her way to Lisieux, and I think for Celine, she probably for most of her life, or her young life, probably saw her and Thérèse on sort of an equal level. Yeah. In many ways, they grew up together, they played together, they were very close. But then when Celine enters Carmel, she becomes Sister Genevieve, and Thérèse is actually given some sort of authority. Yeah. And at this point, Thérèse has matured a lot. And so I'm sure Celine was sort of blown away in many ways, coming to Carmel and coming to know Thérèse in a new light, particularly as her kind of unofficial / official novice mistress. It's not always clear.
Exactly. And I mean, they had written a lot back and forth. So many of those early letters of Thérèse are to Celine, and that are filled with, the spiritual wisdom and insight that she's passing on to her sister. But yeah, it's just the nature that life, is that Celine had her other preoccupations and things, and Thérèse had these special graces coming as a teacher, as a like you said, novice mistress, a formator, a mother in so many ways, and Celine kind of had this idea, I think, entering too, that she had this very romantic idea of Carmel and like how she was going to do this for Jesus, and she's sacrificing everything, and Thérèse has to kind of say, hey, no, you got to be humble. We're all poor here. Everything is a gift. And Celine had a struggle of coming to that. Celine wanted to be heroic. And because she had that personality, and Thérèse, of course, who wanted to be heroic too, but she had learned already what true heroism is in the gospel. And Celine had to be evangelized in some ways in that. And so their relationship changed too, and there were some tensions, and sometimes Celine thought Thérèse was a little too hard on her, actually, and interesting, how those things come, but Thérèse just took so seriously her role of trying to help Celine in the spiritual life and help her be a good Carmelite, and yet still loved her so much and was so tender to her, and she able to kind of strike that balance, which would be, I can't even imagine, like how to do that, but.
So we're going to kind of approach the last conversations of Saint Thérèse from these three viewpoints, the three sisters who wrote these things down. So we have to begin with the Yellow Notebook, which is what it's called. It's kind of a strange name, but it's because it was written in a yellow notebook.
We're not too creative with these things.
Yeah. And so this was the reminiscences of Mother Agnes, also known as Pauline. And they're very intimate conversations in the Yellow Notebook. So much so that Pauline wasn't really sure that these should ever see the light of day. Mm-hmm. And she knew, she had an insight that some of it would come to light, and in fact she would sort of present a redacted version of her notebook to the process for canonization. In fact, I should read a little bit from Father Jean Clark's introduction about this, because the postulator for Thérèse's beatification, her canonization, it was really egging her on to get these reminiscences submitted and then ultimately published, and they would be published shortly, during the canonization process. And so this is Monsignor Dubosc who was the postulator, and he writes, "With what loving care did you not, as you took your station at her bedside, note down day by day and hour by hour during her last months of agony all she said and did. You did not omit the shortest syllable or overlook the least gesture which might reveal the dispositions of her heart." Well, in fact, she did omit. I mean, she wrote them down, but she didn't submit everything. Oh yeah. And so that would the full Yellow Notebook wouldn't come to be published until the 1950s. But he says something to her that I think is really important, which probably started to soften her heart with respect to getting these things published, to getting this whole treasure of a notebook published. And she says, "But now you realize that the numerous souls whom your little sister must conquer and guide in her way are eager to know her better. Yet this little book you have given us is a treasure, in truth, the very testament of our dear saint." And here he's speaking of the book of the redacted Yellow Notebook, or not redacted, but maybe the selected aspects of the Yellow Notebook. And he continues, "We find here her character more truly manifested than in any other record." And he finally says, "Thank you for not having kept the treasure for yourself alone." Yeah. So you can imagine, Mother Agnes reading that after having gone through and maybe left out some of the more intimate selections of these last conversations, and then ultimately they would come to be published. But the notebook itself is interesting because Agnes didn't have this notebook with her. We don't have in your mind, in your imagination, Mother Agnes going into the infirmary with her yellow notebook and sort of writing verbatim everything that Thérèse writes. Yeah. Because in fact, Mother Agnes was writing these things on little scraps of paper. And sometimes it was after the fact, maybe after she would leave the infirmary.
Yeah, because it'd be a little unnatural at times too. If you're like, how do you carry in a conversation that way? If you're just writing. So it makes sense.
So it wouldn't be till years later that Mother Agnes would take all of these collections, these little scraps of paper, and organize them and write them down into the yellow notebook. Just to say that, well, we spoke already about, the size of this collection of conversations, I think, can be in many ways attributed to Pauline and Therese's relationship. That intimacy of, Thérèse saw her as her own mother. Remember that Therese's own mother, Saint Zélie, died when Thérèse was very young. And in many ways, Pauline sort of took on that role of mother for Thérèse. And so you see this over and over again in these conversations of Thérèse speaking to her, my mother.
Yeah.
Again and again.
It's got a very filial sort of tone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say would be, I don't know, if you had to pick a few themes within Mother Agnes's selection of Last Conversations, what are some of the big themes that come out in her, what she has preserved for us?
Well, I think looking through them, the first thing is that you can just see the incredible consistency with what Thérèse had written in Story of a Soul and in a lot of her letters, which I think, again, lends credence that Mother Agnes did a good job of recording these accurately, and didn't intersperse too much, foreign thought, because, so much of what she says here just complements her, what she's trying to teach, and Thérèse is just, you can see it. It's almost like I don't know if she's conscious or not, but she's just purely teaching constantly the gospel by her example, by her words. And so you see things like, of course, her little way, is all through the Last Conversations. It's not spelled out in the same way as it is in Story of a Soul, but you just get it in glimpses, And I don't know if this would be a good time to actually quote from them, or...
You have all these papers in front of you. I'm sure you have something to offer.
Well, let's just see what I can find. Well, I like, in terms of the little way, and this, of course, is also directed towards Celine, and this overlaps a lot. A lot of what Celine writes in hers overlaps with what Mother Agnes writes. So kind of going, Therese's whole mission towards Celine was basically to help make her a disciple of the little way. She saw that was Celine's path, and without that path, she might not survive, as a Carmelite.
I want to get to Celine later.
All right, sorry.
Save that for later, because it's one of my favorite aspects of this writing.
All right, very good. Well,
but you can talk about the little way if you want.
Yes. So we'll just say, a couple quotes here. She says, "When I commit a fault that makes me sad, I know very well that this sadness is a consequence of my infidelity. But do you believe I remain there? Oh no, I'm not so foolish. I hasten to say to God, my God, I know I have merited this feeling of sadness, but let me offer it up to you just the same, as a trial that you sent me through love. I'm sorry for my sin, but I'm happy to have this suffering to offer to you." So it's a beautiful way of just kind of flipping whatever comes our way, and whatever, even our own faults and our sadness and our faults, can become a path of confidence in God. So her little way is coming through. I love what she says. She says at the end, "Oh, how happy I am to see myself imperfect and to have such need of God's mercy at the moment of my death." To be able to say how happy I am to see myself imperfect, right? That's the little way in its essence, in a sense. Why? Not because we want to be imperfect, but because it's a magnet for God's mercy, when we can accept that. And so those kind of things, are all through. She says, "Mortal sin wouldn't withdraw my confidence from me." And she's saying that, hoping that other sisters can see that, so they won't fall into discouragement so easily. Right. I can be confident no matter what. So those were kind of, you can see the little way in that. Another thing, of course, is her, and it's all part of the little way in a sense, but love. Her love alone, really. That Thérèse has this desire to really purely love God.
St. John Paul II called her the doctor of the science of love.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very important aspect of her spirituality.
Yes.
And she is being loved upon in this stage in her life more so than probably before. She's being doted on by her sisters. She's being cared for, and she's experiencing other people's, the love of her own Carmelite sisters. But I think even through that, she's theologizing that with respect to the love that God has for us.
Yes.
And that's very clear throughout the writings. Yes,
and she's even the love that she's receiving, it's coming at a time of tremendous, physical and spiritual suffering. So it would be a moment for someone to maybe not be able to appreciate maybe the tenderness. You're just because you're so frustrated, you're so impatient at what you're going through. And this isn't the moment to go through it. We talked about it in that one episode of at the end of her life, the kind of how she suffered her trial of faith. But just to know that's the context of these last conversations is her tuberculosis that's getting to a point where she can barely breathe, and then it's causing all these other problems, and then her own experience of temptations to doubt the existence of heaven, which she had lived for her whole life, So in the midst of this, you can kind of see love proved, that she's able to keep her patience. She's able to be so loving still. She's able to talk about God, in terms of, loving him regardless of reward or merit, So it's kind of like, it reminds me in the movie, The Passion of the Christ, that when the Apostle John is seeing Jesus being crucified and he's remembering all he said, he says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. And he remembers in that moment Jesus in the Beatitudes or in the Sermon on the Mount saying, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. It's like Jesus' suffering at the end proved, in a sense, the authenticity of what he preached, because he lived it to the end. And that's what made it so powerful in a way, even on a human level, for John. And I think it's similar with Thérèse, it's like she's on the cross for these months, and yet she's able to live the same way of love that she wrote about, that she's taught about before. And it kind of proves, in a sense, her message. So just a couple things, I like her sense of purgatory, that purgatory was a very strong idea. And she writes, I don't know whether I'll go to purgatory or not, but I'm not the least disturbed about it. However, if I do go there, I'll not regret having done one thing to avoid it. I shall not be sorry for having worked solely for the salvation of souls. So it's like she wasn't worried about herself. She didn't do these prayers and indulgences for herself. She did it for others. And that was her path. So it's like this sense of love. I'm not doing these things for myself. Even my spiritual life isn't for myself. It's for God. It's for others. She writes, not merits, but to please God. If I had amassed merits, I would have despaired immediately. So again, you just see that she's not seeking to get her own reward, basically, right. And then in just her patience in suffering, you can see that so much. And then, of course, at the end of her life, what was her last words that are in these last conversations? She looked at her crucifix and she said, "Oh, I love him. My God, I love you." And so it's the seal in a way, of her love. So I think those are two big themes that you can see, throughout.
I want to just switch. We're running out of time, and so I want to switch to Celine, because I think of as much as we have been impacted by this book, our last conversations. Celine was very much impacted by the experience of the last months of Thérèse's life, and she didn't, in the moment, understand it. It was sort of a in hindsight sort of understanding that she gained, and so I want to talk about what I don't know. A lot of we speak of it internally as sort of as Celine's miracle, or Celine's great conversion. I don't know if that might be too strong a way to put it.
I don't know. I think it's pretty appropriate.
Yeah. So Celine, she's affected deeply, and she's very much sort of, when you read her section of the last conversations, there's definitely this interlocutor sort of sense that is going on. Celine is trying to get as much as possible from this experience and from the last months that she has with Thérèse.
Yes. And, as she says, she struggled all throughout, even during probably the last conversations, as Thérèse says things like, you think too much, just trust, or you're not made, for these great things, just living your humble life, is what will please God. Like Celine, struggled even towards the end. And yet Thérèse kept promising her, in a sense, that, she would help her. I will not leave you an orphan. Again, taking on this kind of role of Jesus in John 17 to his disciples. She had that kind of those last words to Celine, I will be there for you. I will show you. And so there's this very interesting part in the last conversations where Celine is kind of testifies to, after Thérèse had died, Celine was thinking during their prayer, during the divine office, and still in her grief, this wasn't too long after she died.
It's like a week.
Yeah.
It's like a week later.
A week later, so Celine's in her grief and is wondering, because Thérèse always said this in her letters and in the last conversations, how they would be like James and John, with our Lord at his right and his left, but that we would be on our Father's knees, God the Father's knees. We have the right knee and the left knee, and this image of being that spiritual childhood. And she really said that, like, this is what's going to happen. She was so confident that this was going to happen. And so Thérèse said that during this moment of prayer of the divine office, where they're chanting the Psalms in Latin, Celine has this thought of, did Thérèse get that knee? Did Thérèse get the spot? That she said we would get. Did she get that spot? And at that precise moment, the Latin phrase "Haec facta est mihi" from Psalm 118 was what was being prayed, and it just hit Celine right in her heart. And she didn't quite know what it meant in Latin. She didn't know the exact translation, but she knew this was Thérèse's answer to her. And it struck her so deeply that she went right away to look up the translation. And the translation is, "This has been done to me." This has been done to me. And for Celine, it was this great moment of confirmation that what Thérèse promised happened, and I can live this too.
Yeah.
Because to be on the Father's knee, I need to be a little child.
Yeah.
And that's my spot with Thérèse. And so it was finally when Celine was free enough to be able to enter into the little way, and truly become that disciple.
And more than a disciple, she really kind of became the apostle of the little way, because this aspect of Therese's spirituality was in many ways downplayed. The postulator of Therese's cause was speaking with Celine, and Celine was really adamant about, the core of Therese's spirituality is this little way. It's this little way. It's this little way. And the postulator was really not getting it. And he was hesitant to really make this a part of the main promotion of Therese's spirituality, because he thought that anything that was a way would get in the way of Therese's canonization, because it would be too specific, it would be too doctrinal, and they really wanted to focus on more of a hagiographical sort of understanding of Therese's sanctity.
And even presumptuous too, in a sense, because he's saying this is new, a new path of spirituality, and that moment was not the best time.
Yeah, and so Celine is asked by the promoter during the canonical process, why do you desire the beatification of your sister? Why do you, what's at the heart of your desire for your sister to be canonized, to be beatified at this point? And Celine says, I answered that it was solely that her little way might become known to the world. I spoke of it as a little way because the saint had consistently used this expression when referring to that particular road along which she was traveling to union with God. It was what we might call the symbol of her school of spirituality. The promoter of the faith warned me, however, once you begin to speak of a special way, the cause is infallibly doomed. Innumerable cases on record bear abundant witness to that. That is indeed too bad, I replied. But a fear of hindering the beatification of Saint Thérèse could never deter me from stressing the only important point that interests me, that her little way might be raised with her, so to speak, to the honors of the altar. Yeah. So you can see, the transformation from Celine really struggling with this idea of humility, from entering the point where she enters Carmel, being under the tutelage of novice mistress Sister Thérèse, through these last 6 months of Therese's life, and this miracle of an understanding of humility, this great grace that Celine's given, completely transforming, confirming in her, convicting in her the importance of everything that had proceeded from Therese's mouth to her.
Yes, and actually, as you say that, it really brings to mind Pentecost, that the disciples, they heard it all, they had it, but it was only when the Holy Spirit came that they were able to finally live it, and really internalize it. And that's, I think, what happened with Celine. And this is an anecdote, and this goes back a few years ago, but I had the great grace of visiting Lisieux in 2015. And you could stop by the convent. You couldn't go inside, to see Therese's place, but often a sister would at least come down and talk to you, so in the speak room. So I came there, I was, a priest and my clerics and everything, and it was before I was a Carmelite. And I knocked. A sister came who could speak some English, and the sister was in her 90s. And she told me that she was one of the last, she made her profession to Mother Agnes. She was one of the last novices to do that. And she was assigned as Celine's secretary as a young nun. Wow. So this was, and towards the end of Celine's life, right? So Celine's already in her 80s. And she shared with me that Celine sometimes would get a little impatient, at certain things. Celine was always being asked to do things, right things, and that anytime she maybe even slightly lost her patience with her secretary, she would always write a little note and put it under her door and say, "I'm sorry." And it just really struck me that that's the little way, yeah. and that's living out to the end. So it just, is a neat kind of confirmation, I think, even.
Well, we'll have to come back to Marie we'll save Marie for maybe another time. But I hope that everyone watching this and listening to this, the reason why we're speaking so much about this is because when you read the last conversations, you really take the place of these beloved sisters of Saint Thérèse. And it's an experience that I think many people have experienced in reading this, that it's as if Thérèse is speaking to them. Yeah. And so I think it's crucially important for us to speak about sort of the people who wrote these things down. It wasn't Therese's hand that wrote these, so that we can gain a better understanding of how these sayings and words and memories really affected them profoundly, so that they can affect us profoundly. Yes. As they caused the great conversions and transformations in grace in people's lives throughout the last 150 years. Maybe we won't count all 150 years because Thérèse was born 150 years ago. But the way in which over the past 150 years that Thérèse has really had a profound effect on the church, upon Christians, and upon transformations that are happening every day. And so I think in that sense, that's why we have to talk about these things when we talk about the last conversation.
Yeah, and even just a quick tie-in to say that so much of that was prophesied by Thérèse in the last conversations, and that's one of the neat things is where she says, basically this is where she says, "I will come down and I will send a shower of roses," or when she says, "My mission is about to begin, my mission of making God loved as I love him, of giving my little ways to souls. I will spend my heaven doing good on earth until the end of the world," and that mission, that we see already how it's borne fruit, as you're saying, it's so amazing to see that she saw that coming in a way. It was a special grace. She saw it coming, and that's what we get in the last conversations.
Yeah. Well, so the last conversations, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, her last conversations, as the title is not presently available as a paperback book. We're working on a second edition, making some corrections that, due to various typos and the age of the translation itself, it's taking longer than we anticipated. But we are planning to have this released in the first half of 2023. So to just give a plug for our website, keep an eye there if you're interested in this book, but also it's available as an ebook wherever most ebooks are sold. So if you're dying to dive right into it, go to those places and that sell ebooks or to our website, you'll see the various ebook channels where you can purchase St. Therese of Lisieux, Her Last Conversations. Thank you all for joining us. We wish you a very Merry Christmas, Joyeux Noël, as would probably be more appropriate for this season. And God bless you.